So to continue with the central nervous system, we'll now look at some of the sensory areas. So the sensory areas really are the primary somatosensory, the somatosensory association, the visual, the auditory, olfactory, gustatory, visceral sensory, and vestibular, which is balance. So it pretty much takes care of all of the sensory, and each one of them has their own separate area. So we've looked at this already, with the auditory being here behind the ear. The postcentral gyrus is the somatosensory. There's an association cortex here. The gustatory is in the insula in there. The visual cortex is in the occipital lobe. And the association cortexes are right next to the primary ones. So, somatosensory, information from skin, so this would be sense of touch and that kind of thing, but also the proprioceptors in joints and muscle stretch receptors and things like that. So it's the part that lets your brain know where your body is at any given time. It's spatial. It lets you know when if you're stepping on a pebble in your shoe, that you know that it's in the middle of your right foot, that kind of thing. So the homunculus for this is very similar to the motor one, with the hands being quite large, face, lips, tongue, quite large. Again, this is the insula in here, and that's where the gustatory is. So just posterior to the primary is the association. So this integrates the input. So this is where we make determinations of size, texture, and relationship between things being felt. It's the part that in the typical Halloween games where you are putting your hands in spaghetti in the dark and all of that sort of stuff, peeled grapes and being told they're eyeballs, all of that is about tricking the association cortex. The primary visual is right at the occipital lobe. That's why if you hit the back of your head, you see stars. And it receives information from the retina. But to make sense of it, we need the association areas. So this uses past experiences. This is where we understand color and form, that kind of thing. It's very complex, and we are visual creatures, and so almost half of the sensory is given over to this visual association. It's the way that we can read. I don't know if you've done those Facebook and internet things where if you can read this and it's all inappropriate letters and things like that, but you can actually read the sentences. You can put them in context. That's all about training the visual association areas. Auditory cortex is right, like I say, behind the ears, and it's where we interpret pitch and loudness, but it's also where we locate. So this is how your surround sound stereo or your surround sound home theater system works, about tricking the location by placing speakers all around. You can use this. The association areas is how you recognize somebody's voice, or how you can tell when something's a piano or a violin, or like it's memories of sounds and interpretations of sounds. That's how you tell noise from music. Olfactory centers are in the temporal lobes, right? It's the only part that goes into the limbic system. So this is an awareness of odor, of smell. Gustatory is perception of taste. It's the same sort of thing. The visceral is posterior to the gustatory, and so this is where you feel your bladder is full, or you've got heartburn, or your stomach's upset, or things like that. You can, those visceral things. The vestibular is balance and position of head. This is the part that kind of can screw up and give people vertigo. So this is also in the insula. Again, we've looked at this before. And this is it in a parasagittal view. So this is the right hemisphere looking from the left, with the left hemisphere gone. So there's some olfactory in here, and etc. So then there are these association areas that take input from all kinds of areas. And it really pulls these things together. So this is how we store memories compared to previous experiences. This is how we decide what it is that we're dealing with by its smell and its look and its sound, and it's like all of those different stimuli come together, and we use it to make determinations, and we store those determinations so that if we ever see it again, it happens quicker. So it's like if you never saw a kangaroo before, you would wonder what the hell it is. But after it's been identified, you remember what it is. And the more modalities that you get, the more you remember. So if you can, more than just visual, if it's sound and movement and smell, that kind of thing, helps you to identify. Right. And the limbic association is what gives us the emotional connection to things. And this is very important. This is very good, because we want to avoid things in the future that hurt us or scare us, and we want to be attracted to things that give us positive experiences. And so we want to be able to remember what's good and what's bad. And the limbic association is part of this too. So not only do we have to rationally see something, we have to emotionally remember what it did to us. And the limbic system is involved in that. So in the front, in the prefrontal cortex, there's a part of the brain where your intellect and your cognition is. It's where memory happens. This is where conscience is seated, reasoning, executive functions. This is this develops under learned responses, and so it doesn't automatically develop. It's we learn what works and what doesn't. We learn the rules of our society. We learn, to have a conscience, that kind of thing. So people that are deprived of a social environment often have great problems with this. Romanian orphans were missing out on a bunch of it because they weren't really socialized. There was a big problem a few years ago with that. So the posterior part is recognizing patterns and that kind of thing, and a big area in there is Wernicke's area, and Wernicke's area is understanding written and spoken language. So it's kind of opposite of Broca. Broca is about developing speech. Wernicke is about understanding speech and written word. These things, even though they seem like they should be together, are not. Many people can understand when somebody speaks French, but that doesn't mean they can speak French, because Wernicke is more developed than Broca's. Right. It's interesting, with the Limbic association area, establishing memories really is, there's an emotional component to it. It's one of the reasons that you can study and study and study, and until you're actually scared and studying for an exam that's tomorrow, and so that you're stressed and scared and your limbic system is involved, then it's very difficult to remember things. When everything is way too calm and there's no emotion, it's just cold and dry, and it's very, very hard to commit things to memory. That's why it's always easier to remember things that are funny. It's easier to remember what a comedian says than what a lecturer says, even though it really is the same thing. It's just spoken word. It's easier to remember events surrounding something that upsets you than it is to remember events surrounding things that you're indifferent to. It's a huge component.